we have a forum, I'd like to officially call this special session of the public order here on December 15th at 4:03 p.m. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Asari,
Hello.
Daly,
She'd be late, she has things, right?
by Flaherty,
Here.
Stephen Smith, here, Rallo. Okay. Rosenberger is absent, Rupp,
Here.
Gosper,
Here.
and Zulik. Present.
Thank you. So for the meeting today, this is a special session called by the mayor about the Hopewell plans for Hopewell South. So we're going to start with framing remarks from Mayor Thompson. We'll have a presentation from the consultant and planning director Hiddle, and then have councilmember question and answer followed by adjournment. So Mayor Thompson.
Thank you, President Stossberg. I am really excited that we were able to pull this together, so thank you for the special scheduling. We did invite the RDC to come as well, so just want to acknowledge that they're present. Some of them, not all of them, because of course the RDC has been working with this property. It's RDC owned property. And I want to just start with letting you know sort of some history of Hopewell very quickly. Allie is our consultant's going to log on, and she's going to really take the bulk of the time here to present what we have. But after I sort of tee things up, Director Hiddle is going to frame some of the planning implications here, so that you know what those are and what considerations have been given. But this is really, we have submitted a PUD. What that means is that we have a really good directional idea of where we want to go with Hopewell South. We have been through 4 years of master planning as a city. We set up a task force at the beginning of the Thompson administration to relook at Hopewell, given the change in cost in housing production, and really see how we could get Hopewell to a place where it's more attainable than what we thought it was going to be otherwise. We have had a public session in October with sort of how we were thinking about Hopewell and where we were going. There's room at the table. And in addition, we have had a couple of council deliberation sessions about housing that have all impacted this Hopewell PUD. So with that said, we have submitted the PUD. That doesn't mean that things are not changeable. This is an opportunity today to ask questions, give input on blind spots that we may have, things that we haven't considered. Maybe we totally missed the boat somewhere. That's what we want to hear from you all, because we're still at a point in the process that we can make some changes. With that said, it will seriously delay things if we have to make such significant changes that we're going back to the drawing board. And we are really trying to mobilize Hopewell to get some housing available, even perhaps as soon as the end of 2026. So we engaged, the RDC engaged Flintlock Labs to put together this PUD. We think that this really makes the most of the Hopewell South property. It includes the preservation of the old convalescence center at 714 South Rogers, while we're doing a study to see if the police department will fit well into that facility. And our goal really has been to seek to be an asset for attainable housing for young professionals, first and foremost, something that's attractive to them as we are seeking to grow our wages and our economy here in Bloomington. And that also means that it happens to be attractive to a lot of other folks in town, people who want to be able to have an affordable place that they can walk to work, to various other resources. We have been hearing increasingly from seniors who want to downsize and can't find a place that's affordable for them to purchase in the downtown setting. Again, the PUD is in a place where we still can make some tweaks to it. I think we have really gotten to a place that is amazing. I am thrilled with where this PUD is right now. We have gotten to a point where a good number of these houses, and you'll see in the presentation, a good number of them are actually affordable to the 80% and below of the area median income. And that is sort of miraculous, especially without a bunch of government red tape that goes along with it. So they should be relatively easy to produce. We do intend to have not only a developer workshop on how to build these, but also some workshops for our local lenders to see what they have appetite for and how to get these loans to be as workable as possible. So we're thrilled. I think what this does also is set a living example of what some changes in the UDO could look like for Bloomington, so that our community can walk through a neighborhood and see what does it look like to have some compact lot sizes. What does it look like to have really realistic sized houses that are not more than what somebody needs? And what that does, of course, is naturally keep them affordable so that we can offer homeownership opportunities to more and more people. So I am going to just hand it over to Director Hiddle to talk about some of the zoning implications. Again, I think this is an incredibly exciting point in the project, and really a lot of gratitude to council, both in the past and currently, and to the RDC, especially, who's been working really hard on getting Hopewell to a point where we are right now.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm David Hiddle, the Director of Planning and Transportation for the city. Just maybe a quick refresher on what exactly a PUD is. They don't come down the pike very often. The last one was the Summit Planned Unit Development, which was approved just as I started about a year and a half ago. So PUD, Planned Unit Development, it's not unique to Bloomington. Pretty much every city, every zoning district, every zoning jurisdiction has an opportunity for a PUD. Sometimes they go by different names, but as often as not, it's just that. And it is what you zone to, and none of the other zoning districts that exist allow for what it is you want to do. So we have a lot of zoning districts. We have dozens of them, R4 and MC and MMs, and lots of different combinations of letters. But none of them allow for what it is that's being proposed here, which is a very diverse mix set of uses, residential uses with different development standards and other different regulations than our ordinance would ordinarily allow. So when that happens, you rezone the PUD and you don't adhere to a given ordinance, a given set of regulations as to how you can use the property and how you can build on it, but you write your own. And so what you write is what carries you through the process. In this instance, as soon as I hand it off to Ally, she's going to talk about what she's written along with the Redevelopment Commission, which is serving as sort of the co-petitioner here, to describe proposed development on the property, as well as the potential uses of the property. Hopewell as a redevelopment site is really the 24 acres of the former hospital campus. It's been the subject of a number of plans and studies. We are talking right now about what we're calling Hopewell South, which is the area south of First Street, north of Wiley. It encompasses 3 blocks. Are you driving? Could you take it to slide 32, please? Yeah.
So this presentation is
What's that?
yes.
Yeah, slide 32 if you could. Sorry to spring that on you. the subject site is 3 blocks, one of which, the easternmost of which we'll call the police station block, because it may very well be in line to become the police station. It's the brutalist structure, architectural structure at 714 South Rogers. And then west of there, we have 2 more blocks that would be developed residentially. Current zoning is R4 for the western 2/3 and RM for the lot on which the future potential police station stands. And then the TRO, the Transform Redevelopment Overlay District, which was written in 2022, it was basically written for Hopewell. Overlays all of it except for the westernmost portions here, and the reasons it didn't extend to those westernmost portions, you hear different stories from different people. One of them is potentially that there was a desire to keep a predictable zoning district here so that it properly and appropriately transitions to the residential neighborhood to the south, which is McDowell Gardens. But we think that what is being proposed here will do that, certainly. So a number of plans have been put together, a number of studies with regards to Hopewell South over the years. 2018, the Urban Land Institute did one, and then in 2018, later, the comprehensive plan specifically addressed Hopewell, but it didn't have a lot to say about it. It really said, we're calling this a focus area, and we recommend that there be additional study done to give us a detailed idea of how this area should develop and evolve over the years. That came together in 2021, which what is known as the Bloomington Hospital Site Redevelopment Master Plan Report. Never adopted as a component of the comprehensive plan, but there is direct narrative link between the 2018 plan and it, but I think makes it instructive at the very least. Just real quick, some of the themes from that plan, which really echo the themes that came forth from the Urban Land Institute plan of 2018, are that there's a desire for a diversity of housing types, a neighborhood scale, which I think directly eschews the idea of monolithic mega projects being in this area. There's a stress on walkability, connectivity, with an emphasis with engagement with the B-line and the public realm generally. There's a desire to restitch, I think is the language used in one of the plans, which is very appropriate, restitch the urban street grid. There's a desire for a lively mix of uses and future flexibility and adaptability. So those are sort of the themes that have been established by virtue of these studies and plans that I think should instruct how we allow for this property to be developed going forward. I think that's all. The line that this will travel, it's gone to the Development Review Committee. Its next stop will be the Plan Commission, and I think it's scheduled for its first with potentially 2 hearings in front of the Plan Commission on January 12th. And then from there, it would go to the City Council. After that, if it's approved, planning would take place. So the planning and development ordinance would be written, and it would actually instruct how the planning is to take place in terms of lot dimensions and things like that. So if Ally's in the house, I think we can move on.
Holly's in the house,
Yeah,
she's ready to
Right
go.
house. She has permissions.
Hi guys, and I'm going to steal the screen share really quickly just so I can forward slides as we talk through. I really appreciate you guys having me in today. I'm dual licensed. I'm an architect and a landscape architect. I'm based in Fayetteville, Arkansas. We've been really excited to be able to work with the city on this so far, and are excited to talk through where we are and hear feedback and really hone in on exactly what we're trying to do. We're calling this a home catalog, so housing options made easy. We are a small multidisciplinary firm, as I mentioned, here in Arkansas, and Fayetteville is a real sister city to Bloomington. We're a very similar population. We are also a major state campus. We have similar student populations, similar student housing challenges, and we're also a karst landscape with similar topographies. We've really enjoyed working through, and seeing kind of how similar a lot of the challenges with housing that we have faced are. I'm a former planning commissioner, and so get nerdy about policy after many years of having to sit through meetings and write zoning codes. And so have been really enjoying working through the PUD process as an opportunity both to hone in on exactly what we can do for Hopewell, but also always trying to make all of this work more expandable to the rest of the city, and as an opportunity to test some theories on some of the potential housing affordability changes that might be, brought forward later into the full UDO. This is a really easy way to test them on a smaller scale to confirm that they're working exactly the way that we think that they will before more broadly suggesting them. We're also working with the national nonprofit, the Incremental Development Alliance, which has trained around 10,000 people in 33 states in the last 10 years to develop in their own neighborhoods. So this is really, it's a nonprofit that's about training locals to develop for locals, working deeply within communities, not as an extractive developer from out of town, but as somebody small being able to build an ADU in their own backyard, being able to take an empty lot that's near them and put something in, being able to add what is missing to their community. And so as part of this program, we're both fully designing and entitling all of this housing, and then we're also training locals to develop it as both a capacity building and as a calibration to ensure that this is really aligned to what locals are wanting to see. We're also partnered with some of our good friends who are fellow INCTEV faculty, the Kronberg Urbanists and Architects, which are based in Atlanta, who have incredible kind of thought leadership on housing and housing policy and the best ways to achieve really good built outcomes. Like me, Eric, their principal, is a small developer and an architect, and so really only designs things that we know will work. We've field tested and we've signed those personal guarantees to make stuff happen. We're both really focused on building healthy neighborhoods, focusing on real estate development as a way to build the background for people's lives. That we need housing, and we need really vibrant places that we can live and raise families and live good lives, and that takes working within really complicated systems that are often trying to do multiple things at once. So that's one of the things that we really try to bring to these programs, is a very systems-wide set of experience and thinking, trying to really get to a great built outcome that is what the city, really wants to see, but working within a lot of systems and codes that conflict sometimes, and really what we're seeing nationally really limit our ability to build the thing that we all say that we want. We're trying to build lovable, sustainable, and attainable housing at a wide variety of price points, which also means a wide variety of sizes. We've tackled this for a number of years through the lens of pre-approved plans programs, and we've structured this in a way that it could be rolled out into a citywide pre-approved program. Those may be familiar to you guys. What we helped with one in South Bend, Indiana. We've worked with on the one in Kalamazoo, right across the border. We're also working on one in Fort Wayne right now. They can be a great way to calibrate to the consistent platted lot sizes within town to build the way a lot of our historic neighborhoods were built, right? Which is not a custom home on every lot, but is really consistent and repeatable house designs that are calibrated to different family sizes, different times in life, different needs. They become really popular nationally because they can expedite development processes. They can cut out a lot of the cost of housing that is coming from process, but it's not really leading to better built outcomes. They can also reduce development costs. They can create local wealth because they're more attainable to be built by, small amateurs. They also develop better built outcomes often because the architecture is being selected at the city level as being, really desirable and compatible with the character of neighborhoods. So they can have simpler zoning often because the architecture itself is already part of the program. And it also often leads to a much greater variety of housing options. We're going to talk a lot about the importance of that as we talk about demographics. There is often this perception that as we, the family, the nuclear family that we're building housing for, often we think of as being, right, 2.5 kids and that dog. That is not a common household type anymore. That really was what the housing market was built for. Through the boomer generation, right? We saw really strong household types being the leading buyer of housing. And we saw that driving a lot of our housing policy types, and the way that we financed it and the way that we built it was a 3-bedroom house with a big yard. That is no longer our market. And that is really, in a lot of places, we're still limited to that type of housing product is the only thing that our zoning type allows us. But in a huge proportion of our communities, that nuclear families are a very small percentage of our household types. The single most common household type here is two people living with no kids. Generally, that's a married couple, although sometimes that's roommates. But 2 adults, no children is about half of our households. Another third of our households is one person living alone. And so, a full 3/4 of our households are sleeping in one bed at night and don't need a 3-bedroom house. Often both people are working. They do not want to be out doing yard work in the weekends. And so one of the things that we're really seeing is a big mismatch that is leading to a lot of struggles with cost. A bigger house on a bigger yard is more expensive than a smaller house with a smaller yard. But we also have a huge amount of our housing stock, which is 3 or more bedroom houses. So if you want a large house with a large yard, we've got great news. There already are a lot of those. The thing that we're not seeing within the market, which is really high desirability and is a really good demographic fit to a lot of household types, is smaller homes on smaller lots, often in a more creative format with more of a focus on community space, social space, and connectivity, and less of a focus on car storage. This also really helps city budgets. One of the things that we're really struggling with across the nation is that a lot of our cities are really tapped out in terms of general fund being able to fund all of the infrastructure that we layer over relatively few large homes on large lots, right? It's not really possible to get enough property tax, payroll tax, all of our different taxes into the city to be able to pay for all of this infrastructure supported by just those 2 homes, often lived in by 1 or 2 people, right? This entire little section of land, this 0.7 acres that we're seeing in this diagram, might only have 3 total residents, right? One of those houses might be 1 person. Statistically, one of them is probably going to be 2. Instead, one of the things that we're trying to legalize and test here is an alternative where in a small part of the city, right here, 2 city blocks, a little less, that we can get a wider variety of housing, that we can still maintain the traditional sidewalks and, tree plots and what we think of as feeling like a really traditional neighborhood, but we can get a much wider variety of housing types and price points so that you can find the kind of house that you want at a price point you can afford in a location that you like with a lot more neighbors. That also really helps our city budget standpoint as we begin to have many more people paying taxes towards the same amount of infrastructure. We're seeing cities be able to balance budgets with this style of development, and it is more affordable to the people that live there. It often builds better community. It's much more walkable and can support much better locally owned walkable businesses. It also houses a significantly broader contingent of residents and at different price points and different phases of their life. We don't need the same unit when we're 23 that we need when we're 43, that we need when we're 73. And so part of this is about diversity of unit type, but it's also about being able to provide options to people within a neighborhood that they like and know. As we look at the specific kinds of housing that we're focused on in Bloomington, we see those same national stats really played out here, that we've got about 1/3 of households are single family detached homes. We have a lot of multifamily, right? Really large multifamily projects. That is something we struggle to understand sometimes too in our community. But we have very little single family attached, and we have very little what we would call missing middle type housing. And so a lot of the code changes that we're proposing within this PUD are geared around legalizing a type of housing that, as we dug into, kind of stress testing, okay, why aren't we getting these kinds of projects? We found that even in some of our newer, more permissive zoning areas, we still had some things that we needed to calibrate to be able to see these kinds of household types legalized. As you can see, we're down here in blocks 9 and 10 in the southwest corner of the Hopewell project. And even within these initial drawings, we can see that there's some non-typical layouts that were promoted in the original master plan that would not be legal under the current R4 zoning. And so even within the early master plans, I think there was an anticipation that there would be some customization within these blocks that would require a little bit of calibration. So what we're trying to achieve here, we'd like, as we've talked about pretty extensively, a mix of housing types. We'd like a really good mix of price points. We'd like to get to a pre-approved home design for each one of the lots to streamline permitting and reduce costs. We're working to be able to deliver a fully buildable set of construction documents for each lot that our small builders and small developers can show up to the permit office, pay for their permit, and be ready to build. This is really about building opportunities for local builders with training and with a lot of this pre-work. And then providing frameworks to support permanently affordable and market rate houses, both blended into the neighborhood. We'll be doing ongoing community outreach and developer trainings to support the built outcomes being piloted and the outcomes being what we intend them to be. And we're about a third of the way through the process here towards public launch. So we're working through the PUD and platting process, and we'll be finalizing land planning with the plans catalogs and starting to do deeper developer and lender roundtables to confirm, a lot of the early assumptions that came from interviews with locals. So a little bit deeper run through of some of the changes here, and some examples of the kinds of places that we're trying to get to. A lot of our historic villages have a higher density than what we allow in a lot of our new neighborhoods. And that often requires that we do some smaller streets. Smaller streets tend to be much safer for pedestrian. They can be more of a shared street environment. We do still need to balance fire code. I'll preface a smaller street need with everything that we're showing you is fully compliant with all of our fire codes. We're also experimenting on some non-typical frontage. So we've seen quite a few situations where houses having front doors and front porches that open out into green spaces and common spaces are really high desirability, especially for our couple of likely young families with young kids. Having a front porch that doesn't open out into a car space significantly improves our community engagement and our sociability space rather than having your front door open out into traffic. It also helps, again, with that budget that we've got units that have much lower infrastructure costs for the city to maintain relative to the tax dollars that they are providing into the city. We're also trying to reintroduce some housing types and density that we're not seeing in some places in the city, right? So hopefully you're familiar with kind of diagrams of missing middle housing. We've seen a lot of these types of housing were very common and very popular prior to modern zoning being passed in the 1970s. And so in a lot of places, a lot of these kinds of programs are really trying to reintroduce these kinds of housing that we used as a country very successfully for a number of decades prior to zoning codes making those illegal. We'll give you a quick case study too of the kinds of things that we think might be attainable as changes later on, although this is not directly proposed within our project, but just to give an example of the kinds of studies that we've been doing about how this might impact citywide. If we look at a block over next to Rose Hill Cemetery, this is between Elm and Waldron. One of the things that Bloomington has as a really strong benefit is the large number of platted unbuilt alleys in the city. A lot of cities that have very deep lots the way that you do really struggle to get any sort of effective infill accomplished when there aren't any alleys in the back. Even when those are unbuilt, the fact that they are platted is really useful because it means that residents could choose to use them, could choose to build them out. The lot depths in Bloomington are very unusual. You have very deep lots relative to most cities of your size, which does then present this opportunity as we start to look at accessory dwelling units are very popular nationally. One of the challenges with accessory dwelling units is that you're then selling packages of two houses. And so the overall attainability of those homes is very low. It's very hard to buy two houses for the price of one. You're instead buying, two houses for the price of two. And that really increases the kind of price to play. So it can really impact our housing affordability, only being able to have accessory dwelling units that are on those specific lots. Being able to plat rear lots using alleys as frontages can create an opportunity for citizens to decide to build units in the back of their lots in yard that they may not be using. In this case, you actually can yield what most cities would say is an average lot size in the front without losing any existing units, without losing the existing character of our historic streets. We can get an opportunity for infill in the back. So this is one of the things that we're testing through some of the policy changes that we're showing is being able to use some alleys as frontages. So as we look at kind of site plan and PUD, what we're proposing here, we've got 3 blocks, although blocks 8 and 9 are legally currently 1 block. We are constrained with Jackson as a right of way in the middle of block 8 and 9 has an already built apron that needs to be aligned. So you'll see that alignment is relatively fixed. Jackson does not go through to the south. And so it does currently have a jog in it that allows a little bit more space for housing. Wiley Street along our south edge is an existing 36-foot right-of-way. Rogers is a 41 and some change right-of-way. First Street is our widest right of way, right? So that one's 66 feet. Fairview is a relatively narrow 16-foot right of way here. And so the pink hatch that you're seeing is the proposed right of way dedications. So we're proposing that Wiley Street and First would stay as is in terms of width. And that Fairview would widen to a more typical right of way, and Jackson would widen to a little narrower than a typical street. We're showing Rogers would dedicate up to functionally the existing building edge, but that we are trying to preserve that building. I'll also preface that, a PUD is really land use based, so it's functionally custom zoning for the lot. And so the site design is going to be coordinated, especially on block 8, as studies for the reuse of that building are followed. So we are showing those diagrammatically, but there are some caveats on exact specifics, especially on block 8. One of the things that we really ran through at the beginning is what we could do under current R4 zoning by right. Because we've got such deep lots along our block 10 over here on the west, we end up with relatively few blocks that are all larger than our minimum lot size, right? We're stuck with that minimum lot width and the minimum lot size because, we can't do anything with out a rear frontage by right. We end up with only a handful of lots over on block 10. On block 9, then, kind of with our R4 by right zoning, we end up with a little bit of a kind of no man's land in the back, which we were proposing to be a detention pond. But by right currently, we've got 28 lots can be created under the existing R4 zoning. And so we've also provided sort of a finished lot value, right? And so this is both taxable to the city as an important value of the use of your land. We often describe cities like farms. You have a limited number of fields, and we have to be able to both responsibly work within them. We have to be able to farm those in a way that we can afford to keep the farm. We also have to really be respective of soil health. We can't be extractive on this. We want to have a long-term view as good farmers. But we want to think about ways that we're using land in a way that both provides housing for residents and supports an economically sustainable city. So as you notice that finished lot value, that's important to note from a taxation benefit as well as kind of overall value of the land itself. You see our average home price is pushed up above kind of $400,000. And so this is in line with what we're seeing in terms of the average sale prices in Bloomington, and that makes sense, right? We've got an overall land value and infrastructure cost that can only be divided into so many pieces, and so those pieces are more expensive than what we'll see as we move forward. So in our initial proposal, we also assumed then we kind of analyzed what happens if we take a full 60-foot right of way on all of our frontages. If that extra right of way is taken out of farmable land, so to speak, and it's moved from an asset into a liability for the city as land to maintain, that is infrastructure that the city maintains at cost. We've got 84 homes, and so a really great impact to the city if we can get all of these code changes passed in this version, but still, and about a doubling in value over what we can do in a standard R4. But then in our final version, we've got almost 100 units, and so we are, we've done some smaller rights of way, which has picked our units back up. We also have fronted houses into green spaces. So we've got a trail frontage in an old alley that provides us a second front door frontage. And then we've got what really is functionally a green street. So pedestrian only with community space in the middle. We've got bike storage. We've got a community pavilion. What we might see typically in a neighborhood as a street is instead both green infrastructure space and social space. We have picked up a few small multifamily buildings, which again, in terms of reintroducing typologies, these are not big, 5-story, 200 apartments. These are relatively small buildings that are kind of here in our mid block, and then we've got another little one that is facing the police department that's providing a little bit of screening to those parking lot lights. And then one that is helping mitigate some large grade on the existing site. So we've got 4 small buildings that are really still house scaled. And then we've got everything from kind of really small micro units that are affordable below 50% AMI for a home buyer, and which the mortgage payment on is significantly less than even a subsidized apartment is. We've got some 1-bedroom, 1-level and 2-bedroom, 1-level fully accessible units. And then we've got everything everything up to some of our bigger corner lots are maintained for more of a family 3-bedroom, relatively nice house. So we have not very many of those, but they help hold the corners and mitigate from some of the scale of existing neighborhoods into some of the smaller units that we keep more interior to the site. From an accessibility standpoint, topography of the site is one of our biggest challenges here because we need a really level site in order to be able to get parking space and, kind of accessible route to the front door and a 0-step entry into a house. And so the limitation, you can see some clustering here. We're up on a little bit of a ridge line where we've got some units that we can get fully wheelchair accessible, is shown in the blue, which is a higher standard than is required within that universal design. So universal design is going to be 0-step. It's going to have wider doorways. It is going to be adaptable to be wheelchair accessible. Full ADA is going to have full commercial turnarounds. The full letter of the law on wheelchair accessibility built in from the beginning. So our light blue are full ADA units. The dark blue are bedroom downstairs, 0-step entry, a little bit more accessible. We've also overlaid both a pedestrian network here in the green, which again is our continuous front door facing to the interior of our site. We've got traditional, pedestrian infrastructure, sidewalks along the streets, and then the blue is our vehicular traffic. So we've got some, low volume speed traffic kind of through our lanes, which have parking off of them for driveways. We also then have more traditional kind of higher volume streets surrounding these blocks. In terms of creating lots, we currently have 6 lots on site. And so as we begin kind of a first phase of one of the proposals is that we'll create 4 lots in the northwest corner here where we already have infrastructure. Those can be done via lot line adjustment. Those will be built to R4 standards so that we can go ahead and get a first phase running. Lot 5 then will be the rest of this. Lot 6 is these 2 large blocks. And then we'll plat the following lot lines to create all of the smaller lots within the neighborhood. So that will allow us to start with 5 initial houses while the plat process is still working. Conceptually, the site is really roughly running kind of from the southwest to the northeast. And so we'll be handling water quality through green infrastructure within the neighborhood through the hatched areas. We'll have a common storm park with the block 10 user, which is likely the police department. And there will likely be some underground storage underneath the surface parking lot. That's an existing surface parking lot that is remaining more or less in the same location, but will be, have green infrastructure and screening added around it. Trash is remaining within Jackson Street and Fairview Street. While fire access does work through the lanes, the fire trucks have a little smaller turning radius than the trash trucks do. So we've worked with both of those departments to ensure that trash pickup and fire access, police response and all of those features work fine with the proposed circulation. For custom street sections, we're proposing that First Street First Street would remain as is. It has currently been improved. We are discussing an option to potentially add some parking in some of those blocks on street, but generally First Street is proposed to remain as is. Rogers Street is proposed to be a slightly modified section to be able to work around the narrow existing right-of-way and the narrow right-of-way around the existing building. And so we do an 8-foot multi-use path so that we have pedestrian and bike on both sides of the street with on-street parking both sides and typical drive lanes. Jackson Street is proposed to have on-street parking and sidewalks and street trees. Fairview Street is a very similar right-of-way. So those are slightly narrower than our typical at a 48-foot right-of-way with 1 lane of on-street parking. And then Wiley Street is proposed to remain as is. It's a historic street section that fits the character and quality of the neighborhood itself. And so we're proposing leaving that as is. That also lets us improve our tree preservation. There's some really nice trees at the back of the sidewalk along our southern block. And so we've proposed holding houses back from those so we can maintain that tree line along Wiley and reduce the change for residents south of Wiley of what they see as they look out their front porches. And then our lanes really, are functionally rear alleys. We've introduced a new street type so that we can call those street frontage, but that's really intended to be a relatively typical alley section. That this is your back door, your garbage is back there and the condensers are back there. You're pulling into your driveway, but your front door is facing onto a green street. the unit types and unit mixes. We can kind of run through the catalog if that's helpful later, but we're showing some kind of examples of our smallest unit type, which is called the Aster, up to some of our largest unit types at the corners. And there is a wide variety of kind of size and shape, a pretty consistent, will feel really familiar architectural language with these. And again, these will be provided to the builders with full construction documents for these units. And almost all of these units are things that we have built before and we know work and are really marketable and desirable. So we're here for questions. And I know we'll have some, and then I've also got contact information for all of us if you've got questions that come up after today's conversation.
Great, thank you so much. For the record, that was Allison Quinlan from Lock Labs. So now we're down to the council member question and answer period.
Is it also permissible, Council President, for RDC members to ask questions or not?
Let's start with council members.
RDC has to leave in 17 minutes.
Where do you want some?
So on some of the other proposals, not the one you're bringing through, but some of the like A and B, you had price points indicated, but you don't have any for that, the map for the proposed PUD. So what are you envisioning the price points of the housing to be?
Let me pull that exhibit up and we'll share that. And I apologize, we'd had an option 3 that we're on option 5 now. The option 3, I think, included our price points. In general too, let me fix our screen view. We in general at R4, our average home price is around $400,000 with being able to make all the code changes, but having a 60-foot right of way on all of our streets, we were at about $350,000. Our current price point here is $270,000. So we've been able to bring our overall price point down through these code changes by about 40%.
Ally, can you give the range too?
Yes, so they range from our smallest unit, our Aster, which is our little studio, is $83,000. So that is affordable without subsidy at market rate to 35% AMI. And then our most expensive house, so we've got 2 of them on the corners. Our big family houses are $650,000. So those are affordable to right under 200% AMI. And so you'll see our average is able to stay low because we have a lot of the smaller, more affordable units and only a handful of the more expensive units. And so sorry.
Is that for purchase? Those prices are
These
these
are
all
purchase prices, and I'll clarify too, these are not, we're not saying this is the price this house will go for sale. This is early analysis to say, using comps of current homes that are being sold in Bloomington and getting an average price per square foot and then applying those to the homes of this size. This is what these would sell for at market rate with no subsidy, you know, with none of there will be affordability protections. We're proposing a forgivable down payment assistance for qualified home buyers. There will be additional affordability layered onto this, but this is just an early analysis of at what housing currently sells for in Bloomington in the current market. This is what these houses would sell for, you know, today.
And that's what the city giving developers land or not? No.
Was that a good question for?
So
The land is
that's
not intended to be provided for free. There's discussions about for qualified home buyers for the affordable units, that the value of the land may end up being to buyers, the down payment assistance that is forgivable over a number of years. But the land is not intended to be provided within these numbers. This is just if everything was market rate with no subsidy, this is what the price points would be kind of naturally.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions from council members? I see Councilmember Rallo's hand up. Go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I had also a question about home price and for your plan A and B. Could you send us some material about the average home price in Bloomington? Because I'm coming up with a number of around low to mid 300. And you were mentioning something higher. But in any case, yeah, I was concerned about the range, but you're saying that there are only a couple of homes that are 676,000 or whatever approximate. Could you provide you know, a list of the number of homes that would be available that would be, say, uh, under 200,000, or say 200,000 or close to that? In other words, I'd like the number, you know, how many homes would we expect that would be truly affordable?
Yes, we'll send this detailed spreadsheet out, but we can give, you know, more detail about exact which home plan has which number of units. One of the things that we typically do when we're doing an overall assessment is eliminate a lot of the kinds of homes from our kind of comparables research that we couldn't produce now. And so, for instance, if we've got a house that's very affordable because it's in very bad shape, we're going to want to pull that out of this kind of comparables group, because that's not something that is really going to be used as a comparable when we're selling it. And so we did end up with a lot of the new construction and kind of what is legal now, with seeing an overall higher comparable, because our overall average is getting brought down by, you know, people who are buying homes that are then tearing them down, and they're functionally paying lot value. But yes, I can send some more data on that.
So you can send that data. You can send the whatever, the home design, square footage, the likely price, etc. of, and to know exactly what would be proposed here.
Yes.
Okay.
I
Great.
actually, that was part of my plan commission lunch packet actually, so I am sending that right now via email to everybody. Just give me a second to attach it.
And then we've got that spreadsheet pulled up to share, so that you guys can see this, and we can zoom in, because I know that these on screen and in person, these numbers may be very small.
Yeah, I didn't know that it was that was not in that packet for this meeting.
One of the things to discuss too, just as a kind of caveat, when we start talking about affordability in housing, I always want to give a couple of kind of level setting for everybody, right? That everything is going to be tied to AMI, so area median income, right? So area median income for a one-person household is different than area median income for a two-person household. And so we've got a chart that is a typical, you know, census data that is provided and available, of what an average, what the area median income is for a one-person household, for a two-person, for a three-person household. And so each one of these is tied, you know, we've got an AMI level over on the kind of second to last column, which is the household is affordable, which means that no, you know, federal standards define that affordable housing is no more than 30% of your total gross income going to housing. So that is not just your mortgage payment, that is your utilities, right? That is your home insurance, that is all of your houses related to your housing, all your costs related to your housing. And so we have, in a really, you know, the dumb simple math version of this, right, is our area median income divided by 12, right? And then 30% of that, we need to make sure all of these housing related costs aren't more than that number. And so if it's affordable to 100% AMI, that means that a person making the area median income of your town is not spending more than 30% of their gross income on housing. And so in order to be affordable, that is the standard by which they're measuring it. But there is a little bit of striation here, because we've got 1-bedroom units and studio units, we've got 2-bedroom units, we've got 3-bedroom units. And so we're assuming, right, that a 2-bedroom unit is a 2-person household. We're assuming that a 3-bedroom house is a 3-person household. We're assuming that 1-bedroom and studio unit is a 1-person household. And so there's a little bit of variety built into the spreadsheet, but those are all tied to the current incomes of residents in the last measured year. And so we've got, in terms of units that are affordable at under 100% AMI, that is 70 of our units out of 98. So that means 71% of units that are proposed within Hopewell South are going to be affordable under federal definitions.
Thank you. Are there other questions? Councilmember Flaherty?
Thank you. What does the city envision doing with the land, I guess? Is it all going to be like individual lots sold to individuals at market rates? Is that what's envisioned? Or we don't know?
We haven't got there.
Okay. I noticed So yeah, we'll have to look at the details maybe that we don't have yet. I'm looking at the chart on the screen and it says, it looks like there's a 6-unit and 12-unit building, but otherwise all 1-unit buildings. Looking at some of the comparisons, for instance, using R4 zoning, it said 28 homes, but of course R4 zoning allows multifamily, it allows quadplexes, triplexes, so 28 fourplexes, for instance, would be 112 homes, which of course have different value, but also have different price points for the units. Could you tell me a little bit more about the range of scenarios that we're exploring, I guess, with the existing zoning codes, including what it's zoned for right now, as well as any of the other zoning zones that we have available to us in the recently updated UDO?
Yes, and let me come back to those site plans so that we can look at that together. So one of the things that we're finding and are finding typically is being challenging with, you know, 3 and 4 units buildings, especially this is true, right? So duplexes tend to be pretty easy to build because they can still be built under International Residential Code. We don't need fire sprinklers. We can typically then, you know, park them in the back if it's a duplex. One of the challenges with a 35-foot wide lot to be built with a fourplex is that it's not really possible to park it. And you've only got 35 feet of width in the back that you can pull into. And so that's typically only like 3 parking spaces. And so unless we have really good on-street parking that we can count towards our parking minimums, which is not currently something that we can do by right, we can build legally a fourplex, but we can't make it pencil because we've got to get fire sprinklers and it's a 1 lot with a fourplex in there. But then we also can't get the parking to work. And so duplexes then become really appealing. Typically duplexes are ADUs, but we again get into that same affordability problem of if we've got 28 different lots that each have a duplex on them, the only way to sell those at an affordable rate is to be able to sell them individually, right? If we're selling 2 houses are more expensive than 1 house. And so that's functionally what a duplex is doing. And so even if we can get a duplex that we can park on the lot, because we probably could get 3 spaces to work for that duplex parked off the rear alley, we then struggle with, we have a condo association in order to be able to sell those individually, which means we then have 28 different condo associations that are all unrelated on the site, which becomes very complicated to do. Practically, very few places are seeing that happen, and I think that's one of the things that we often find when we are hired in a new town is there's this desire to build a type of housing that is not, it is legalized, but the market is not producing it. And often that means that there's an analogy that is really commonly being used right now, which I think is great. It's not mine, but I'll borrow it. Which is that housing is like a door with a bunch of deadbolts on it, right? Imagine your old school apartment door that you've got 7 deadbolts on it and you've got keys. Maybe you don't lock them all the time, but housing is like that. And so zoning is one of the deadbolts, and we've got to get zoning open to get the door open. But often even once we've fixed zoning, right, and you can build a fourplex in R4 zoning, we're still not seeing people do it. And part of the reason is building code, right? It's those fire sprinklers. Part of the reason is parking. That's another deadbolt. And then part of the reason is ownership structure and finance. So one of the other downsides of needing to condo a building in order to sell units individually, if it's a really small building, is that you need a condo association. Condo financing is harder than single family home financing. It's harder to go get a loan for, go get a mortgage for your condo. And you've got owner occupancy requirements. And so only a certain number of condos can get financing if they're not already sold and owner occupied. And so often then you end up with those condo buildings, the units haven't all sold yet. The first home buyer can't get a mortgage and has to be a cash buyer because they can't get a mortgage for it because the other units aren't currently occupied because they haven't been purchased yet. And so you end up in this really complicated like death spiral of housing, which a lot of people are finding themselves in, where even when something is on paper legal, there's still a bunch of other deadbolts that still exist. And so while yes, 28 homes times 4, right, would be about the number of houses that we're proposing, it's really challenging to be able to build those and then be able to execute them at an affordable price point to a home buyer who can get a mortgage. So one of the biggest things that one of the things that most of these PUD changes are based around, right? And one of the most important things to kind of keep in our heads as necessary to get to attainable housing is to be able to access federally backed subsidized mortgages that everybody uses for their big single family home on their lot. We have to be able to get to a unit on a piece of land that is owned fee simple. And so we need property corners, we need a property description, and we need people to own the outsides of their building. And so one of the best ways that we can do that is being able to plot very narrow, very small lots. So we've personally built in our town on lots as small as 800 square feet. R4 has a 4,000 square foot lot area minimum. And so one of the things that we're asking for is no lot area minimum, which then allows us to do things like on our final lot plan, right? We've got a couple of little Aster duplexes that each one of these Asters is a duplex, but they're each platted on their own lot. So they can each be sold fee simple. They're not a condo. They can be sold and you can use a traditional mortgage to buy those. And so yes, it is more complicated. Absolutely. I did breeze by kind of some of the things that are allowable, but hopefully that's helpful context to kind of understand how many different deadbolts we have to work within to get stuff done.
Thank you. Great.
Other council member questions?
Just want to thank you to the RDC members who have joined us and enjoy the rest of your meeting.
Councilmember Rallo, is your hands up from before? Do you have a second question?
I have a second question.
Okay, is there anybody else who needs first round question before we go to Councilmember Rallo for a second? Okay, go ahead, Councilmember Rallo.
Well, I was just wondering a little bit about background. So the way I understand it is that Flintlock is going to be recruiting and training builders. And I wonder if this has been, have you achieved that previously? Is that correct? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, and that's something we're working with the Incremental Development Alliance to do, which is one of their core mission and the thing they've been doing for the last 10 years. And they've all the way served as master developer on projects like this in places like Memphis previously. But this model of recruiting, training, supporting local developers all the way through the process while having no actual kind of developer role themselves is really typical to their work.
Okay, and could you include, or could you tell us, what the developer profit margin is in this, is a percentage of the list price of the home in this process?
We're currently calculating, and a lot of our work we try to have be very pro forma driven because we know that there is an opportunity for a city to layer lots of different affordability subsidies in specifically for qualified home buyers. We typically only try to show things that are marketable, financeable, and buildable at market rate, assumptions. And so we typically are assuming that we need a minimum of and I'd like to really preface this of we're guaranteeing no one a return, right? We're guaranteeing no one any amount of profit. And our assumptions for design is that we want to build things in that we know work at market rate with about a 20% return on total purchase price, because that is what a bank typically expects to see before they'll give a construction loan. And so there's a lot of the details about the exact way that the land sale is going to be financed and how is, home buyer assistance going to be provided that will be, kind of worked out through the development process and in a separate framework. But in our initial assumptions, we want to assume that the project works at the minimum financially viable level, which is typically for most regional banks about a 20% profit margin prior to anything going wrong, right? Which is an important element to remember for this process.
Okay, one other quick question. Have you, in any of these past projects, we've been considering SROs, single room occupancy dwellings as a means of transitional housing? Since we control this property, I mean, the likelihood is that it's occurring is pretty slim, but it might be far likelier at Hopewell. Has this been considered and discussed at all?
I don't know that we've specifically discussed or recommended any SROs. I'm an enormous SRO advocate. We currently have an SRO project that we're pitching here in Fayetteville. That would be our first self-developed SRO. We tend to try to test things before we develop them ourselves as R&D to make sure they work before we recommend other people do them. So we've got a 68 unit SRO that we're currently recommending on city land that's in our town. And so if that is of interest, that is certainly something that, like, for instance, the Faulkners, which is our kind of largest set of buildings here, one or both of those could easily be swapped out for more of an SRO format, if that is of interest. That's not been directly discussed previously, but it is really small units with good public space are a great way to build in attainable housing at deep price points that are hard to match otherwise.
Excellent responses. Thank you for answering my questions.
Thank you. Are there other questions from council members? Okay, go ahead, Councilmember Barry.
Thank you so much for the presentation. One of the questions, and this may be building off of Councilmember Flaherty's earlier question, could you talk a little bit more about the demand signals that or market intelligence that we have about each of the types of housing? Because I sort of get that the story here is very much tied to this sort of mixed housing approach. So like, how do we know that this is the right mix? Like, why not more what do you call it, the single efficiency units or whatever we call those? Like why not more of those? So like, how do we arrive at this mix as the right mix?
Let me come back over to our. I know spreadsheets are not very exciting. As
I love spreadsheets, macros and stuff.
I love it. Okay, so as we looked through, the first thing that we're often analyzing, trying to get to unit mix, and the thing that a lot of developers are going to look at first is what's our proportion of 1 bedroom to 2 bedroom to 3 bedroom. And so we have stacked our 1, 2, and 3 bedroom proportions to match population on household size more or less exactly for Bloomington. And so, we're maybe a little heavy on our 1 bedrooms. We're at 48 instead of 45%, trying to get our affordability numbers down a little bit. And, this is a Tetris game too, right? There is some of this that's like, okay, well, we have this one lot left. What will fit on that lot? But we're typically trying to match our household types within the community as our first stack of 1 to 3 bedrooms. I'll admit too, one thing that we really have discussed pretty heavily within the planning department is that the accessibility standards within the city of Bloomington are really unusual for us. This is the first community we worked in that has such a high percentage of accessibility units, it's challenging from a topographic standpoint. Is like, the reality is there's so many of those that we can get a parking space to a front door. And so we are stacked with a little bit more kind of slightly larger units that are slightly more expensive because it's a 1-story, right? And so you, like us, have tough soils, and so foundations are a little higher. So a larger 1-story unit to be accessible is slightly more expensive than a smaller footprint, same square footage, but 2-story. So we do have a higher stack of our accessible units than we might in some other unit mixes that we would propose. And then we try to do an intermixed unit type, unit size within the neighborhood, as well as, that we don't have one big cluster of all of our studio units are in one place. They're really evenly scattered throughout the neighborhood is relatively important. And then from a kind of large bedroom unit, those are really slated to some of the financial analysis of looking at what is the thing with the fewest days on market that is showing as really high desirability. And those are, in some instances, those bigger, more expensive houses. And so we've got, the Chinkapin is our largest 3-bedroom that I think is our most expensive house. So we have 3 of those. That's 3 of our corners on our main block 9. And then we also have the Elm is one of the other larger ones. And so we have 5 of those. And those have been one of our most popular 3-bedroom plans. It's a very tight 3-bedroom that still, kind of checks all the family boxes. And so it's an 1,800 square foot floor plan that's been very popular in a lot of communities. And so it's about 520 again at, average price point, price per square foot equivalencies. And so we have slightly more of those than the slightly nicer ones. But we've got about 8. So a little, 8 or 9% of units are kind of those larger, more expensive family homes. While then we've got, 8 are the little micro units that are affordable at 35% AMI. And so there is not a science to it. I don't want to, lie and say, okay, well, we needed exactly 7.5 of this one. But some of this is a Tetris game. Some of this is matching existing demographics. And then some of this is analysis of what's selling quickly and what is popular. What sits on the market, for 6 months, what has 30 days on the market, which means somebody made an offer first day and it closed.
Awesome. And then just to follow up with, in terms of mechanics, and maybe this is more a question for planning, but in your experience doing PUDs like this, have developers ever deviated from the plans? I mean, as I understand it, the incentive is that you have these pre-approved plans, but that doesn't keep a developer from buying a plot and then doing something else with it, right? Using the normal allowed standards.
So the goals with these, and this is yet to be kind of fully fleshed out. So I'll describe the goal rather than the full kind of policy. But the goal of these is that these would be sold. And one of the conditions of sale of the land is that you are buying the land to build only the provided set of floor plans. And so we do have a mechanism by which the RDC could allow people to, there's a built-in set of modifications that are allowable. In any of our pre-approved plans programs, you can remove this one bathroom window if you decide that you want to. The porch railing can be this or it can be this, right? There's some amount of variety that is not impacting overall quality or neighborhood that is within the purview of a developer. The intention, though, is that these are being sold with a contractual agreement to build a house with the plans that you are seeing, and that there is an opportunity to swap houses. There are some of these houses that have the same footprint, and so there's an allowable way that the RDC could okay a developer if it's 3 years from now. And there's one of the unit types that has been less popular than was expected. And there's one that's planned, but they have another unit that's the same size. The RDC could choose to swap for another plan in the catalog is the intent, although the lots are very calibrated, as you see, to the exact width of those houses. And so there's a limited amount of switching that you could do. But the intent is there's a little flexibility, but it's really driven by the RDC being able to make call the ball, if it's 3 to 5 years from now, the market has shifted, they have something really specific that they want to do, but that they are structured where the PUD allowances are only houses that are within this catalog or a pre-approved catalog approved by the city council, so that there's some ability to be flexible later, that they could come and ask to add another unit type to the catalog, but that you buy the lot to build the house that we're providing you.
So thank you.
Councilmember Flaherty, if you still have another question.
Yeah, I guess one question is whether so the transform overlay was mentioned by Director Hill earlier. We've used overlays to change things about the base zoning district that don't quite fit the context of something unique like downtown, or in this case, a redevelopment area that has a massive parking garage on site, for instance. I think parking minimums were eliminated. I think I also heard that this section or portions of it may not fall within the overlay district.
That's right.
I'm curious if the overlay district could be expanded to include this section, and if an overlay might have been a reasonable way to approach this as opposed to a PUD. I'm thinking, I have more questions about PUDs and their administration over time and some challenges we've experienced as a city there historically, but more specifically initially, would a overlay be able to accomplish what's being accomplished here?
Well, we did analyze during kind of the, a PUD it's a heavy lift. And so prior to proposing the PUD, we worked through with the city on could expanding the TRO accomplish this? The short answer was no. And the frontage on lanes and the ability to do custom street sections was one of the biggest elements of the PUD that allows this to happen. Minimum lot size in the TRO was still bigger than some of these that we're proposing for some of our really deeply affordable units. And so it would have gotten us a lot closer, but it still wasn't all the way there. And so the PUD was in, and I also tend to be a, sometimes PUD suspicious person as a planning commissioner who has had to administer really old PUDs. It is not, I don't want to say it's no administrative additional burden. This one seemed worth proposing because of the opportunity to test some of these really specific code changes that we think could really help with housing affordability, attainability within the city generally, but which we would not feel comfortable proposing citywide without more of a pilot test. And so this is an opportunity to test some of those elements on a small controlled scale, which then can be assessed whether or not those are desirable for broader output.
Thank you. Point of clarification, I didn't mean the overlay as it exists now. I meant the overlay as it could be amended. So you mentioned lot size minimums, that could be changed, you know, for instance, or other things in the overlay district. But I thought I heard.
The street widths, custom street sections is a really big one because otherwise the transportation plan would have to be amended in order to provide that. And so custom street sections, lot frontage to allow for that green street, and then lot size and lot width minimums were some of the high level things. I don't want to say that's a fully comprehensive list, but off the top of my head, those were some of the elements that pushed us to a PUD rather than an overlay.
Okay, more.
Okay. Are there other questions? Okay, I have a couple of more practical questions, I guess, and some of this might be like, because I am the council representative on planning commission, and so some of this might be like, hey, when you come to planning commission, can you talk about this a little bit? But like, I'm looking at the plan for trash collection, and like, so is there first an expectation that city sanitation is gonna be picking up?
Yes.
Okay, so with that and kind of thinking like, okay, so there's trash on these very specific corners, and then there's gonna be one trash container per unit. There are gonna be a lot of trash containers on these corners on pickup days. And I just really anticipate that being highly problematic in terms of just the sheer number of containers then that are on these very limited corners. So is that something that y'all have thought about?
That is something that we've gone all the way to laying out the size of rolling bins in plan, and we will likely be proposing some permeable pavers in some of those corners so that we've got a hard surface that those cans are going on that's really clear. And we will likely have one or two parallel spaces along Fairview that will be blocked, that like when you've got street cleaning and you can't park on this side of the street for 2 hours this morning of the week, that on trash morning, that parking space is not available and it's being used for cans. But yes, that's being fully laid out. And, you know, it is because a lot of these units can actually pull up to the street. And we're using basically each one of the lane corners, right? So for instance, this corner of Jackson Street, if you guys can see that little hand, down here next to these parking spaces, it's actually just these three little units, this ADU in this house, and then these two units. And so it is, you know, in some of these, it's a 1-bedroom house. It doesn't need to have the largest size can. So we're guessing on using the medium size can for all of them, but then we're assuming that there will also be some smaller ones that are being used. But yes, those are being dimensionally laid out, and it's being considered having a hard surface material for those to rest on.
Okay, I would appreciate seeing those details at the planning commission level. I think that, I guess the other thing that I wanted to know about were the parking, the perpendicular parking spaces at the corner of Jackson and Wiley.
Mhm.
And what are those, like, are those visitor parking spaces? Are those parking spaces for those units? Like, what is the vision there, and why are they perpendicular spaces as opposed to angled spaces, which tend to be more usual at this point?
Jackson Street went back and forth through kind of each one of these iterations with the city, as the preference from police and kind of from our side was that it's more of an alley. It doesn't go all the way through. It is very low traffic. We really only have one street frontage because we've got kind of the back of a building and a parking lot along the other side. So we started out with it was an alley. We then kind of graduated up to, okay, it should actually have sidewalks. So if we're going to do sidewalks, it should have street trees. It got itself all the way back to a street. But one of the challenges with this existing building and with us pushing our right of way as far to that building as we could get it, was that the police department is frankly pretty crunched for parking. And so as we looked through different ways that we could make up that balance to them, Head-in parking in this area, we both had really good topography to be able to achieve that. We had a really good door that it could come into. They had a specific division that needed some extra parking that didn't need to be within secured parking. And so the intention of these is that they are police, specific spaces. We can, when we load spaces onto an alley or onto a street, it's significantly more pavement efficient because we're not making another drive aisle just to load the parking spaces onto. And so we did make Jackson, part of it, Jackson's custom street section nature is that it can have head-in parking. Part of the benefit of it being head-in instead of angle, because Jackson is not a through street and Wiley is relatively low traffic, is that if they are head-in, then people can access and come in, both coming and going back up to First instead of pushing more traffic onto Wiley. And so some of that is just being reflective of it's a very low traffic street. We are not expecting back in to be problematic whatsoever. And in a lot of ways, we actually want the extra traffic calming of the little bit of extra friction, but we'd like those to be accessible from both directions to really push as much police traffic up, much less residential, much wider right of way, larger setbacks, versus pushing any additional traffic down onto Wiley.
Okay, and then to follow up on that, I feel like that whole explanation was hinged on the fact of this current building on South Rogers becoming a police station, which he also said, that was still in process of being studied. That is also something that would need to come through council as a bond and a completely separate thing. So, how much of this whole concept is kind of hinging around this assumption that that is going to end up being a future police headquarters?
So we have built in the PUD quite a bit of flexibility for the recognition that everything that's being shown on block 8, which is this police block, is very conceptual, right? So everything that's being shown on block 9 and 10, the housing, is not very conceptual. Those are fully designed houses, and I can tell you where their parking space and their trash goes. Everything that is on block 8 here, their design consultants came on, weeks ago. They are still in very early analysis. And so we have built in flexibility that everything on this block is conceptual and will be adjusted. And there are some things that when we show them in the PUD, the number of accesses onto streets and roughly where those go are less flexible and would require more modification if those came back and changed. So things like that are somewhat set. We wanted to show some of the head-in parking on Jackson because we wrote Jackson that head-in parking was allowed. And so we wanted to show that that was possible. The east side of this center line of the street, we want to recognize might be slightly different as long as it's like the transportation plan within the standard street sections, that there's a little bit of variety that is allowed. But if the building was removed and this block was entirely, redeveloped, it would more or less default back to the existing TRO overlay standards, because the PUD only modifies the underlying standards in the specific ways that are listed, and we've only listed a handful of modifications to code. And so the PUD for that block is relatively light. In terms of changes that you all would see from normal zoning, if for some reason the building came down and it had a totally different user.
Thank you. Other council member questions? All right. Councilman Clarity.
Thank you. Thank you for the explanation earlier about some of the challenges with missing middle housing types that from a financing and administrative perspective. What I'm hearing from you is that basically, despite zoning allowing duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, they're too difficult to build. So what we really need is smaller single family homes on smaller lots in order to have market rate affordability for homeownership. Is that right?
For homeownership specifically, that has been the single thing that we have been able to find that is fitting through the most of these deadbolts. And townhouses can count, attached single family houses can still work for that, but really small format homes on their own lots has been the only thing that we are finding that works for home ownership specifically. If we were only trying to gear this towards affordability and we were really gearing towards a larger percentage of rentals, we might see more multifamily in what we would propose. But with the really explicit goal here of promoting home ownership, small homes on small lots are where it's at.
And no zoning district in the city of Bloomington's UDO makes it legal to build that type of market rate affordability, is that right?
None that we were able to find had both a lot width minimum and a lot size minimum and setbacks that worked for what we are currently showing you.
Okay, that's disappointing. We should perhaps propose a law to change that. Why not develop a new zoning district though, or change an existing one? If this is like a good idea, it's been proven out elsewhere. I'm struggling with the PUD aspect of it, as I'm sure you can tell, because we've had a lot of mixed experiences. They become stale over time, difficult to administer, costly, et cetera, et cetera. And in some instances, like with head-in parking, for instance, actually don't meet our standards, which is a concern. So I guess why not make a zoning district that allows this, even if it's only here to start, and then allow that zoning district to apply in a targeted way elsewhere over time, for instance, corner lots in gridded neighborhoods where lot subdivision is easy, places where we improve the alley to allow that type of subdivision you were demonstrating on the lot between 3rd and 4th Street, for instance, in Prospect Hill. So yeah, tell me why PUD and not a zoning district.
Custom street sections is the short answer. I do think that new zoning districts, and that exactly the mechanism that you were describing is something we've used a number of times, where we test a new zoning district just on one lot, or we've even had some communities where we pass a new district, but it's functionally opt-in. So people can come and ask to rezone to it, but it's not put on the map anywhere, although it's adopted first, which is a great way once some of these other things are worked through. The custom street sections is the reason that the PUD really took the kind of lead on the approach that we could use, because I do think that a modification to the transportation plan to allow for some more narrow street sections long-term is a really, great recommendation. And that's a pretty big lift in terms of administrative process before anything could happen. And so the PUD allows this to get rolling and to see how it works while some of these other processes that are a much longer process can take place.
Well, I think it's a small follow-up, that's okay.
Yeah.
Which is, let's assume a world in the next 5 years where we do some of these things, maybe develop or amend existing zoning districts to have the lot dimensional requirements that would fit with this as a zoning district, and update the transportation plan, this comprehensive plan, to allow more, I don't know what it is exactly, I'd have to learn more about it, flexibility with respect to non-car streets as frontage, for instance. Would the idea be to, like, I'm wondering about like this as if like over time, decades in the future, right? Like it'd be really nice if when we do sweeping zoning changes 10, 20 years from now, that this is part of it and we don't leave this behind as a PUD that was a great idea in 2025, but come 2040, we're much more enlightened on something else and this is left behind, like so many PUDs have been, and that our recent UDO remapping process went a really long way to overcome this patchwork we had all over Bloomington, 80 some PUDs or whatever it was. So thoughts on that, the ability to adapt this in the future, I guess, to the normal process instead of its own special thing.
I think that the more that can be done, the more positive impact you're going to see about housing everywhere. And I think modifying your existing zoning districts that are already on the map is going to be the most impactful way to do that. And I know that there's political challenge, and that's not as easy as just saying it. I can fully appreciate that too. I think it may be a good question for David too. One thing that, I can fully hear you on the challenges of PUDs over time. I absolutely agree. I'm also not sure whether this could be designed to sunset, that the intention is to build exactly what you're seeing. And a lot of the PUD is written around that, right? That there aren't intended to be really significant architectural standards for the existing buildings because we're showing you what every single building looks like and it can't be modified. But then modifications to buildings default back to the prevailing architectural standards at the time. And so we've intended it to be able to be default back to zoning. But I'm not sure if you could build in a sunset to a PUD, that allows it to be built and then it kind of automatically sunsets unless extended.
I can add a little bit to that. The UDO stopped short of forcing PUDs to be absorbed into an existing zoning district, but it does strongly encourage that they be absorbed into an existing zoning district. I would certainly hope that in 5, 10 years' time, we do have a zoning district that accommodates the things that are being shown here. And so when that happens, as I think over the past several years, we've taken down dozens of PUDs and assigned them standard conventional zoning districts. Close to 100. Close to 100. I would imagine that is exactly what would be done here. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other last questions from council members? Okay, that was technically the last thing on our agenda. Mayor Thompson, is there any other types of information or general feedback that you would appreciate right now as part of this work session, or Ally or Director Kittle?
I think it's just, I want to express that this meeting is an effort to keep you all in the loop before it's a thumbs up or thumbs down decision. And so this is a good time to provide feedback and concerns while we're still working with the PUD. And my hope is that this is an active conversation and it's not a, you know, we don't hear anything and then we get to council meeting and there's a whole bunch of changes asked for, or we just don't like the PUD in the end. This is an effort at co-creating and keeping you plugged in throughout the process.
So that sounds to me like maybe feedback from council members would be appreciated. If anybody has a comment perhaps around what they've heard or any specific concerns that they would like to see addressed before it goes to council in a more official way. Councilmember, 2 minutes now.
Well, I just wonder if, I like the plan in general. I like the PUD in general. And I do note that, if Councilmember Rosenbarger's resolution last spring had gone forward, then a lot of these, missing middle, things would have been allowed to be built sooner, throughout the community. So I did want to point that out. But, in general, the sticking point for, you know, triplexes and fourplexes seems to be the financing. And I wonder if there have been any conversations with CDFI, Friendly Bloomington, or any other funders to make financing more available for those kind of types.
We have had, I don't know if you're asking me, but I'll tell you what I know. We have had conversations with lenders, CFI, et cetera. It's just, right now, it's hard to get done unless you have a good model for doing it. And you know, the reason that we are getting some plexes built elsewhere is because they're all rentals, and then they're rentals primarily for students. We're still not housing our young professionals. We're not. And once they're big enough that they need a sprinkler system, it's not just that a mortgage would be more affordable, the rent also goes up. The developer has more money in that unit. And so if we can look at developing things that fit a code that don't require that, that's where we get some affordability.
Yeah, I want to reinforce that of it's not a small change for cost to, right? So International Residential Code, the IRC, is 1 or 2 units or townhouses. Anything under the International Residential Code can be built by a residential contractor. We don't need fire sprinklers. You don't have weird fire separations where you've got, you know, fire caulking or lightweight gypcrete that's on top of a floor plate, which is it's a custom detail that like commercial contractors can do. What we're finding, and we've done a number of just, you know, volunteer basis, state level code changes, both the Incremental Development Alliance and our office. We just introduced a bill in Oklahoma to move more units under the International Residential Code. We successfully, one of our alumni and faculty got one passed in Tennessee. We've passed one in North Carolina. We've passed one in New Hampshire that's existing buildings only, but they don't have a lot of new construction, so that was effective. Dallas is recently, because in Texas, states have their own power to pass their own building code, so Dallas is now legalized up to 8 units under the International Residential Code. But the thing that we are finding, having done, the state code change in Tennessee was in 2019, I think. And so since then, Kronberg, who's one of our partners on this project and a good friend, has built several multiplexes under IRC and under IBC. So the International Building Code, 3 units or more. It's the same code we use to do like airports and factories. They've built them both in Chattanooga and then with the same builder, same floor plans, just the different codes, and then done cross pricing of the two of them to be able to field test what kind of a cost change that makes. The same building built under IBC is approximately 40% more expensive, which means your rent needs to be 40% or more expensive. So it's not just the financing. There is a huge threshold by which, we have very few communities in America that we've ever worked that you can build one fourplex and make any money. Like it doesn't pencil. Like you can't make it work. And so a lot of that is building code driven. And so we are working on that at the state level. And we've had some conversations about a potential Indiana bill because there are so many communities in Indiana that are struggling with exactly the same question. Indiana is, a Dillon rule state, which means communities cannot pass their own building code that conflicts with the state fire code. So it would need to be done at the state level. But 3 and 4plex buildings nowhere in America for building code reasons can't really make any sense. You can get a traditional 30-year residential mortgage, an FHA loan, a secondary market mortgage for up to 4 residential units on a lot. So you can get a mortgage for a fourplex. You don't have any comps for fourplexes, even if it would work, which means we can't get an appraisal that works yet. And if we have to build it under IBC, no one can build it and make any money. And even if a foundation came in and did it, which is what's happening in Chattanooga, the rents in them have to be so high to cover the construction costs that they don't make sense yet. And so that is something that zoning has fixed, but we've still got a bunch of other deadbolts that we've got to work through. And so, there are ways that some of these could be converted into, some of those corner 3-bedroom houses could be converted into a fourplex later if building code changes were made. But it doesn't make any sense for us to show and legalize building something that then is not going to be able to be financeable and nobody's going to be able to make work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other comments from Councilmembers, Councilmember Dewar?
Thank you. I'll share some positive feedback. I'm very excited about the value of the land that may be possible to use as down payment assistance. I think that's a really cool aspect of the project, in addition to the smaller streets. And I'm really interested in the developer and lender workshops. And if it would be possible to attend, I would love to, just to be able to communicate that with the rest of the community. Is there anything else that I wanted to say? Yeah, thank you for this.
Any other council member points of feedback or Councilmember Flaherty?
Just a question first too. The presentation is very helpful by way of information, but I think what's in the planning commission packet is probably much more detailed.
A lot of it was duplicative.
Well, this is just a presentation. I mean, there's no it's code essentially, right? I mean, it's like a substitute for code, like an actual PUD, like what all the exact standards are. Like that's not read yet.
Honestly, I mean, what we got was kind of like a preview for a lunch session as opposed to an actual.
Petition.
We have not gotten the petition yet at all. I'm also hoping the petition is gonna be a little bit more detailed. There is a little bit more detail about the unit types and those plans, but I think not at the level of detail that we found.
Okay, thinking of the mayor's request for feedback, it's like definitely happy to try to do that. It is also a little hard until you actually see the proposed zoning district standards or PUD district standards to fully, comprehend it / give detailed feedback. My only feedback, I guess, is like, well, I appreciate this session. It might have been nice a little earlier to talk about whether or not we wanted to go to PUD versus zoning district approach. I expressed some hesitancy about using a PUD as a tool for our best thinking on affordability. If this is really what we think is going to move the needle, like we should be talking about it in the context of our zoning code and what needs to change in our zoning code. So not that's precluded necessarily by this, but it does add layers that might be unnecessary in my view and are like kind of suboptimal. So that's my general concern, but I need to spend time and review more detail.
Thank you. Other council member comments about it? I guess my primary comment also revolves around that idea is that it really need to be a PUD and the primary reason for that seems to be the streetscapes, and that seems to open up kind of a bigger concern for me about exactly how inflexible the transportation plan might be in terms of trying to make our goals kind of work together and align in ways that they're maybe less aligned right now. I'm also generally skeptical, I guess, and I mean, to get a PUD right now, you have to have a minimum acreage, and that is probably at least partly why that last forms of the proposed police station is in there. And I guess I just have in general a lot more questions about that building and that whole project, which was, you know, originally kind of scheduled for demo and replacement entirely. So I have more questions about that kind of place, but I don't think it's necessarily appropriate here. But I also wonder whether the PUD is really the right tool for this job. But maybe it's the only tool for this job. But yeah.
I think that is an accurate assessment of, you know, we did go back and forth a number of times, pretty in depth with the RDC and with planning to assess that we did all get to the point we thought was that this was the best tool to get it accomplished. And that doesn't mean it was, you know, a perfect tool, but it was kind of the tool that we could use to get to a lot of these things relatively quickly without coming to you guys with, you know, a really comprehensive and intense zoning kind of set of revisions that was going to feel pretty aggressive.
There are no other last comments? Anybody?
Just thank you to the mayor for calling us.
Yeah, and thank you to Allison and Director Hill, and there's a lot of people there are fewer people in the room now than there were when we started, but there is interest in this, so thank you everybody for coming.
Thank you, Ally.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
With that, I will adjourn.